Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Non-Native Leader video podcast series where we talk to people who are working in a global international context. They're protagonists on the global stage, but they were not born in an English-speaking country. We've talked to many people now, if you follow the series, from NGOs to corporate people, from artists to sports people. It's a broad spectrum of non-native leaders. And today I'm happy to have here with me Janine Schall-Emden. And as usual, I apologize in advance for the pronunciation. I always try to do my best. And Janine is a great example of what we want to do here with the series, because she's going to tell it. I'm not going to tell it. So Janine, welcome to our series. I'm very happy to have you here. And so, where are you at the moment? That's the first question I usually ask people.
Okay. Thank you, Daniele. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to get to chat to you. So I am currently based in Italy, but that's been for the past year and a half, more or less. Before that, we'll get into it, but it's the world is our oyster. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in Italy at the moment.
Okay, in Italy. And 1.5 years in Italy. But before you had different experiences, shall I say everywhere in the world? Can you give us a hint? Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about preparing a little bit for our conversation yesterday, and I started counting the times that I've moved over the past, since I've been 19. And it's actually, if I'm not missing any, 29 moves, of which 16 with children, and of which 11 transnational moves. So it's been a wild ride. So I started off in Venezuela. I was born and raised in Venezuela by German parents. I studied in the US, in New York. I went to a college outskirt New York, and then I did my master's degree in Columbia, in New York, in Manhattan. I decided for an international development career. So at that stage, I wanted to work with NGOs, but I always had this idea of going back to Venezuela. I always had this in my heart, eventually I'll go back home. And even though, people were telling me, I'm not sure, you're choosing a pretty international career. So anyway, after graduating, I ended up in Africa, in West Africa. I went to Chad and Mali. I spent 2.5 years there. Then South Africa. Then after that, it's been a bit kind of a ricocheting between Germany, Italy, and South Africa. So those were kind of the repeating countries, just to end up in Italy now. Again, wow. I've always continued with kind of an international development career in different positions.
So wherever you were, you've always kept that same interest in the international approach. And you've been on the global stage a lot. And you've moved, you say, 29 times, and you're still smiling. So this is
there's hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I see people, including myself, you have to move and go crazy. Oh no, I have to move home, and maybe it's just around the corner, and people go mad, and including me. I don't like that too much, but fair play. It's been quite a journey. So it started pretty early for you, right? Because you said you went to study in the US. So is there like anything you can recall of that experience? So how was for you starting in a different country?
Yeah, I think that was probably the hardest one of all, strangely enough, because it's just the first time you go abroad after, I was born, and I lived in the same house since I was born, and it's sort of everything was, I went to the same school from, basically 5 years to, till I graduated. So it was a very predictable life. No, it was very kind of everything I knew, everything, was fairly familiar to me. And I think that those first, 2.5 years in the US, it took me to sort of feel more, comfortable. So it took quite a while, I have to say. Just that initial bit. Even though, I think I did what many people do when they first go abroad. I surrounded myself with people from my same culture. And we ended up, speaking a lot in Spanish. And so just kind of recreating sort of what I knew, but in a different context. But yeah, I think it took me a while to then start kind of opening up to other perspectives and just starting to understand, how I fit in that context. So I would say those 2.5 years were probably, if not the most challenging, one of the more challenging moments. Yeah, just to start, like getting it started, basically.
Okay, yeah, sure. When you first get there, everything is so different from what you expect. Absolutely. And how were you feeling at the time? So,
I think you do feel sort of lonely. You feel out of place. You feel, but at the same time, you also it's exciting, no? It's challenging. It's like you're getting to meet all these new people. You're starting to see also what you're good at and not good at, but like measured by a different yardstick, no? Like there's that one yardstick that from the context where you are, where you kind of fit into a certain category, and sort of it's the same. Here you have a bit of an opportunity to reinvent yourself, no? And that's also quite exciting, no? So so I think I saw myself, just looked at through eyes by people, from different cultures and from different views of the world, and that was also a way of reimagining myself. So I think that was probably an unexpected, benefit of moving abroad, just to kind of get the chance also of seeing yourself in a different light.
Yeah, and some people say if you want to grow, if you want to progress, you have to go through pain. So that's that initial state of discomfort you mentioned. That was probably part of it. So part of becoming, should I say better? No, a different version of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you start seeing what are the expectations of you, because they change, right? As you grow. I mean, I was fairly young when I left, and as I was growing, into a young adult and kind of going to college and then to a master's degree, like you start seeing yourself, what is it actually that is expected of me? And so you challenge yourself more, no? And then perhaps also you start understanding, just getting a better understanding as well of what I like, not only what am I good at, but also what do I enjoy doing. So I think moving abroad allows you to do these things in a way that staying in the same place doesn't necessarily, I think.
Yeah. And you believe that so much that you've done it how many times? Yes.
Yeah. I think, yeah. So after the US, I think the moving to, from New York, going from New York, packing up with my little, 2 suitcases and going to Timbuktu, that was probably another challenge. Yeah. Literally Timbuktu, that I lived there for 2 years. So,
Wow.
but yeah, so that was another, really kind of, again, different expectations, different, just doing something completely different, and putting yourself, in hot water, so to speak, just.
Yeah, literally.
But literally,
In that case.
hot sand. There is not much water.
True. But yeah, like going from an extremely urbanized environment to how can we call it? Like quite the opposite. So that must have been challenging as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it's
Yeah, it's just a different culture as well. I mean, again, New York is a bit of hodgepodge of cultures, so you have everything. But there it's just it's a very rural environment. For some time, I was the only person of white skin, so that was also a bit strange. Now, just to what does that mean actually? Like what kind of being looked at in a certain way, and being like a literal outsider, very literally. But yeah, also finding your place in that regard. No, so it's because I wasn't there as a tourist. I was there for work. So, I had my job, I had things that I needed to do. And so I found my place, it's just, it was, again, it took a little while to adjust. Yeah.
Yeah, different culture. And then, so then you kept moving and you kept exploring the Oyster, as you call
Yeah.
it. And so, how was like your impact with Africa? So, complete different world. You've been in different countries there, and I
Yeah.
guess you had different views, different approaches to the continent there. So, like,
Yeah.
can you give us one or two experiences?
Well, you see, the interesting thing, it's not so much about Africa, it was more rural or urban, right? Like if
Yeah.
you were in an urban environment, it was very much similar, yeah, perhaps at times more chaotic, or, if you're in Chad also, there was, of course, restrictions in terms of free speech or things that you could do or say. And, working with non-governmental organizations that were very much working in the space of human rights and, in that case, also female genital mutilation. That was not always easy. So it was definitely specifically because of the challenge
Mm,
that I saw other people also go through,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it was definitely eye-opening. The interesting bit is, yeah, I mean, many urban environments were very similar to Latin America, so it felt quite familiar, going to South Africa, all of a sudden, Pretoria, it was like being back at home, it was in
Wow.
very, very many ways, good and bad, very similar to an urban Latin America. So
Yeah, I
also,
mean,
in terms of the inequalities, but
yeah, I suppose there's two interesting bits there, right? So the first is, how do you adjust to a culture where, the government has like strict regulations on speech? And so how, I suppose it takes time also to come up with a way so that you can adjust to the way you speak, the way you act. How do you do that?
well, you see, I mean, you have people of reference that you trust, that you look up to, and you mirror them, and of course, a lot of these people are very courageous as well. So you do have to be careful, as to how much you want to risk. When one of the
Yeah.
times I left Chad, my passport was taken away, and I had to bribe an official. So in that regard, like you put yourself also in situations that are uncomfortable, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, because they know, of course, they know where you're working, what you're doing, and so it's not always you get put in situations that are morally tricky as well, no? But where
absolutely. Yeah.
you just have to just in that moment, you have
Yeah.
to solve your problem.
And I
So
think you have to watch out, every step you take. You can't say like, yeah, go with the flow, because you always have to be careful of what you do, what people say. So yeah, I don't know. I was just curious, yeah, because it's something that we
yeah.
don't see every day. So it is different in a way.
Yeah,
And
no, absolutely. And then I mean, you deal with it as you know in that moment. But you do have to, I mean, I think the crucial thing is don't go unprepared. You have to know what you're getting yourself into. No, do
yeah.
your research, do your homework. Don't go unprepared. That's the worst you could do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other interesting bit is about the big divide. Yeah. So when you see like urban to rural, um, like you mentioned South Africa. Yeah. So there are disparities there. So again, how do you adjust to such a reality, which is again something you don't see every day and everywhere?
hmm No, as I mentioned, South Africa felt very familiar. It was interestingly enough, in my case there as well, I was working with an international NGO. So even though it was based in Johannesburg in South Africa, my frame of reference was Latin America. So I was working with countries in Latin America. So um, it felt more familiar, if you will. Like it just again, good and bad, and also having grown up in a fairly insecure,
True.
security wise, environment, being back in such a situation, it was at times more challenging, I have to admit, just because it was, I had more run-ins with security issues in South Africa than I'd ever experienced in my 19 years in Venezuela. But yeah, I mean, it's just a way of moving in the world that you have to be kind of have common sense and be aware what is surrounding you.
Yeah.
And that way you preempt a lot of potentially critical situations. But in terms of adjusting, I have to say I didn't have, I can't speak of an adjustment issue at all. I think I fit completely right in, and it didn't feel unfamiliar at all. Yeah, it's just,
Wow.
meeting new people and like a
Yeah.
very international crowd we were. And so you do end up, I have to admit, you do end up surrounding yourself with a lot of expats as well,
Hmm.
at least in the South African context. So you do have we had a lot of South African friends, but then there was also just a big expat crowd as well that we were hanging out with. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose after a while you develop certain skills where you can recognize the different reality and you adjust quickly because it comes
Yeah.
with experience, I suppose, with practice, with traveling around, with
Yeah.
meeting new people all the time. Sorts of
Yeah.
things you develop, I believe.
I imagine that you must have heard this in your conversations as well, that at some point you feel like you are from everywhere and nowhere, no? Like you
Yeah.
acquire skills that allow you to adjust to many different situations, but you never really truly feel back at home. Like if you go back home, there are always things that are unfamiliar again, because you are now, a different person. You've moved into a different space culturally, and you get to see, your eyes are open to things that aren't okay, in your own context, things that
Yeah.
then when you get back, it feels, it's jarring to see that, because it's just like, oh, that doesn't, I didn't remember it being like that,
Yeah.
so, but you see them. So it's a good thing in a bad and a bad thing. Like you just have to
Yeah.
understand that that's how it is.
Yeah, exactly. When you get that question, where are you from? You have to think. I don't
It
know.
really takes, yeah,
I
yeah,
can't
it's hard.
remember. Wait a second. Where am I from?
Which
But
one do I choose? Which one of my identities?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. It is incredible in a way, but it's that sort of personality you develop with traveling around and with moving around so often, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah, but it's what I try, and also now I have two kids, and they're 10 and 14, and I try to tell them, the good thing, the beautiful thing is that you don't really have to choose. It's a fluid bit. Maybe today I feel more, Latin American, or tomorrow I feel more German, or now I remember, something of my South African kind of culture, that the many years I spent there. So like it's also a beautiful thing, because
yeah,
you get to inhabit so many different parts.
absolutely. You got to mix and match personalities, identities, nationalities. Yeah.
Mhm.
And do you think your kids like this? So what's their approach to being multi something, multi everything?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends, right? Like I think they do enjoy fitting in everywhere, like you leave them in a camp in Germany, and 20 minutes later they're, like you could imagine they sound like German kids, or then you go to Italy and they go to school, and you never doubt for a second that they're Italian kids that grew up and spend all of their time here. So I think they do enjoy that fitting in part. I think sometimes, especially for the older one, there is psychologically speaking, a point where you feel like you have to choose your identity, like you feel like you want to identify with something
Mhm.
specific, no longer something movable and mutable. And so I think that's probably yeah, like that comes with the teen years, that's becomes a bit more difficult, but they'll
Yeah,
navigate it.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure they will. It's just, yeah, again, unusual, but it is something, yeah, to keep an eye on anyway. It's
Yeah,
a
for sure.
great thing, I believe. And so we mentioned, okay, Spanish, English, German, Italian. So what was the turning point for you? So how did you, again, navigate all these languages? Um,
Hmm. Yeah, um, I think it depends, right? It's very much it depends what point in time you are in. Like for instance, when you are working, I work in all of the languages that I know. Like I've also worked in French, I've worked in English, I've worked in Spanish, I've worked in German. So often the more dominant space is what you're working on at the moment. You know, like I end up dreaming in the language that is dominant at that point in time in you know, in my career, or I mean, at home, obviously the languages are always, you know, the ones that we chose to speak. I speak German to the kids. We speak Spanish in a family context, and at times also English. But yeah, it's really quite fluid. I mean, it just doesn't, I often have, I hear people say that they sort of have to switch chips when they switch languages.
Sure.
That doesn't happen to me. Like, I actually mix them a lot, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Um, but it's just, they all coexist. They're just all there. And again, like, I think the turning point is, what am I working on at the moment? If I'm working on something dominantly Spanish, then that's probably just something that's kind of more at the forefront of my mind in that moment. But yeah,
And
so
this is an interesting point, because it defeats the idea that you have to learn those languages when you are a kid. But you can, that is, I don't believe in that. You can also learn languages as you grow as an adult.
for sure.
And it's naturally it becomes a natural process to you. And as you said, you can mix languages,
Yeah.
and it feels natural to you. So that really defeats the idea, I think.
Yeah, and I think I think if we need to speak about a turning point, the one turning point that I can really identify is now when we moved to Italy, because I think this was the moment where we very consciously decided, now we'll stick it around. You know, this is not going to be one more of many moves. You know, this is where we will stay for the foreseeable future. You know, if we can, of course, like, it always depends, you know, what life throws at you, but yeah, as long as we can choose, we'd like to stay here. And I think that turning point for us was also, of course, facilitated by the fact that after COVID, a lot more readiness to working remotely has been open. No, like, I've always worked online. As I mentioned earlier, I worked with Latin America from South Africa, and that was, you know, what, 10 years ago now. So for me, that wasn't unfamiliar, but like, for me now, what has definitely changed is there's much more of a willingness to engage online. No? So also, you can work for my former employer. The most recent work that I've done was based in Germany, and I've done all my work from here. So it's become a lot easier. So the turning point for us was that, I think, like, to really, in a way, embrace staying put. Just staying put for a while, and also for the kids to be able to have that stability that I think I had as a kid, no? Where you can just also stay, you know, and then with time, if they choose to go elsewhere, then that's their choice. But just for the moment, as a family, to just stick around.
So putting away the suitcase for the first time.
Yeah. We're trying.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's a big change, obviously, when you think about your experience. So, Janine, we're towards the end, but I have one final question, really. So, when you think about people who are interested in having an international career, either traveling around, or, you know, you mentioned the opportunities we have these days, that we can travel without moving, so we can work internationally, was being at our place, staying in our home country. So when you think about this, would you have any recommendations for people who are interested in being protagonists on the global stage, like you?
I think my only recommendation would be aware that when you take a step out, it's actually pretty hard to go back. You know, just be aware, be mindful that that's probably the choice that you're making. Not always, right? Like, it's possible, or that if you come back, you'll come back a different person, and that needs to be okay too. Just be mindful of that. That would be my main suggestion. I think often a lot of frustration comes with the fact that then people see, yes, they take their first opportunity outside, but then it's really difficult, you know, to find opportunities back home again, just because once you go out, you start developing, you know, other networks, you start reaching out, and then it becomes, in a way, much easier to continue to perpetuate this life as an expat or a life, moving around. This is if you decide to move out. If you decide to have a career that is international, I think there's a lot of resources, and I just recommend looking into those. I mean, there's this whole movement called digital nomads, right? Like, so you can kind of be anywhere you want and have different types of careers. And those are things I think that we're, more and more, there are tips and tricks out there that you can follow and look into, and just also see what other people are going through, what their experiences are. So I just recommend looking into that as well. Just look at what are other people doing, and which one of those experiences appeals to you, and something, so that you can just be conscious of where it's taking you. That's all. That it's, that you are in a way somewhat in control.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have so many resources these days that, it's, let's say, easy enough to get inspired. And then, it's, as you said, it's hard to come back once you get into that sort of mindset, So yeah, absolutely.
And just start, don't get overwhelmed. Like, just take your first step, like learn that language, or, go abroad, even just for a longer holiday or something, and just dip your toe into it and see where it takes you. But then just, I would say, be aware of what it is you really want.
Absolutely, yeah. So get a flavor, and then, ask yourself, do I want this? Do I want to do that? And then, get inspiration from wherever you can, because we have plenty of resources these days.
Yeah, totally.
Great advice. I really love it. Okay, Janine, look, it's been great. Thank you very much for being here with me.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And thanks everybody for sticking around and staying with us until the end. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.